This is Bredgar Church, today part of the benefice of Tunstall with Bredgar. The church here already existed before the Normans arrived in 1066. It began as a chapel dependent on the mother church of Milton. Some of the stones at the base of this enormous 83-foot tower are said to have formed part of that Saxon church.
One of the most notable and attractive features of the church today survives from Norman times. This is the west doorway of the tower with its fine zigzag moulding. It is built of cornerstone and is similar to the one at Borden.
The church is dedicated to St John the Baptist. In the 13th century it was given by Henry II to the hospital of St James at Wincheap in Canterbury, which cared for women with leprosy. In 1343, the church was valued as bringing in a revenue of £14 a year for the hospital. Bredgar is unusual in possessing this ancient chantry house, which stands in the street adjacent to the pond.
In 1392, Richard II granted Robert de Bredgar a licence to found in the village a chantry college dedicated to the Holy Trinity, consisting of a chaplain and 2 clerk scholars. Robert de Bredgar was a wealthy priest with friends in high places. Clearly, his aim in founding the college was twofold, being both a concern for his soul's well-being and for the training of clerk scholars to be priests. Although many chantries were endowed in England in the 14th century, it was the educational provision of the Bredgar chantry which made it unlike other chantries established elsewhere in Kent. There was a third and overriding reason why Robert founded the chantry. He was trying to redeem himself in the king's eyes for the shocking offences of extortion, trespass and robbery he had been charged with just a few months before. So a dramatic gesture of piety on Robert's part, necessary if he were to regain the king's favour. The chaplain and scholars were to live in the college to conduct services in the parish church, and the scholars were also to pursue their priestly studies. The college was generously endowed with 250 acres of arable land and property in nearby areas.
The church was largely rebuilt in 1393 when the chantry college was founded, so that the chantry services could be held here in the chapel to the north side of the choir, which served as a chantry chapel. No doubt the founders of the chantry paid most of the cost of rebuilding.
The nave arcades were erected, as were the south aisle walls, the west tower and the west wall of the north aisle.
A screen with a rood loft over it was built between the nave and the chancel. The walling is of knapped flints, and new windows were placed in the chancel.
All over the country, for a generation after the 1530s, change was constant within parish churches, and no one could have remained unaffected by Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries. Images of saints were swept away and mural paintings were whitewashed over. Screens and banners were destroyed. Until 1842, a medieval bell hung in the tower. In 1579, Robert Mott of the Whitechapel foundry cast or recast a bell for the church, and that is still in use. Today there are 6 bells in the tower, which were rehung with new bearings and frame in 1967. A painted wooden sign hangs at the base of the tower beside the bell ropes. It was placed there in 1751 and consists of a reminder of the behaviour expected of the ringers. My friendly ringers, I to you declare, you must pay 1 penny, each oath you do swear. To turn a bell over, it is the same fare. To ring with your hats on, you must not dare.
During the 19th century, several memorial tablets were placed on the walls of the church. In the chancel on the south wall, the Mertons of Parsonage Farm are remembered.
William Merton, his wife Mary, Thomas Merton and his wife Sarah, and their young daughter.
There are also these 2 hatchments related to the Fern family, and this royal coat of arms dated to 1663.
On the north wall is the Brenchley family memorial to Thomas, who died in 1818, his wife Hannah, who died in 1841 at the great age of 94, their 2 married daughters, and also, sadly, no less than 11 other of their children who died in infancy.
The Reverend Marsh died in 1814 and was buried at Bredgar.
On the wall of the north aisle of the church is a tablet dedicated to his memory and that of his first wife, and also to Martha Whitaker Jeffrey, his great-granddaughter, who predeceased him. Marsh married 3 times in all, and lived for 60 years at Burnham House next to the church. The memorably named Reverend Samuel Rotten Pigott arrived in Bredgar in 1838 when he was 29 to take up the post of curate. Pigott spent the rest of his life at Bredgar, and when he died aged 83, he had been curate for 10 years and vicar for 44. He built up the congregation in his time, even though the Methodists were thriving in the parish. He lived in the present vicarage on the south side of Parsonage Lane, which in 1872 was described as a rather inferior cottage.
The painting behind me shows the Reverend Pigott and the interior of the church before the restoration began.
Around this time, Comyn Ching was a London businessman, a brass founder who purchased Bredgar House and lived the life of a country gentleman there with his family from 1867 until his death in 1890. He was a liberal in politics and a great supporter of the village school and cricket club.
When a new vicar was appointed, the Reverend Robert Douglas, in 1892, the restoration of the church began straight away. In January 1893, he wrote, "The church has been surveyed by Mr. Leonard Grant of Sittingbourne. About £1,000 will be required to complete the work satisfactorily." This is quite a mountain to climb, especially at a time when he noted that the previous week's collection amounted to £1.
The work of church restoration continued for some years, as and when funds could be raised. In 1895 a new wall was built around the churchyard, and the Reverend Douglas continued to fundraise. Miss Harold of Bredgar House presented him with a cheque for £180 in 1896, which was somewhat more than the Reverend Douglas's annual income. This would go a long way towards meeting the costs of providing the rest of the new seating, windows, a pulpit, and restoring the tower. Celebrations were held 2 months later, when, after a period of closure for work, the church again reopened its doors.
In 1901, the south porch was rebuilt, and in 1903, Douglas thought of getting the tower in proper repair, securing promises of donations. However, in 1923, the fund for this was still going strong.
A new clock for the tower was given by Charles Homewood of Ufton Court, Tunstall, in 1902 as a thank you offering for the coronation of Edward VII.
And so the church passed into the 20th century in his energetic yet elderly hands.
The Reverend Douglas left the parish in 1903 for retirement in Bedfordshire, where he died 7 years later in his 80s.
Those with less money, but still enough for a tombstone, could be buried here in the churchyard amongst their ancestors.
Here we find the landed families of the Goodhues, the Pyes, Bensteads, Ratcliffes and Woods, and here also the families of the craftsmen, Earl the wheelwright, Reed the blacksmiths and Wiles the miller of Dean's Hill.
Many headstones testify to the large number of children who went to an early grave here as elsewhere in Victorian England. One such commemorates the children of John Earl, a wheelwright of the street in Bredgar, and his wife Mary Ann.
There are 6 children aged 11 and under remembered here. Thankfully the Earls had other children who survived longer.
The Reverend Oscar May was vicar here for 24 years from 1934. He kept a cow or two and cycled round to visit his parishioners and giving milk to the needy. The church today is Grade 1 listed and is very light inside due to the large windows.
There is a small amount of stained glass, that in the north and east windows of the chancel being fragments of medieval glass windows that were sucked out when a flying bomb landed locally during the Second World War. The Reverend May collected as many fragments as could be found, and they were reassembled to form the windows that can be seen today. The original must have been quite magnificent. Amongst the many villagers who died in their own beds at home, the tomb inscriptions commemorate a few who, in the service of the British Empire, died thousands of miles away.
Private Ashley Gotham, aged 24, was killed serving with the 24th Regiment at Isandlwana in the Zulu War of 1879. Henry Campany Gotham was a younger cousin of Ashley. He probably joined the Navy, but died in a tragic swimming accident off Gibraltar in 1888 when he was aged 22. William Jenner decided to emigrate for a better life, but was drowned accidentally on passage to Australia in 1819, aged 27.
George Pye was another young Bredgar man who drowned far from home. In fact, he was only a boy when he drowned on his passage home from Madras in the Lady Flora in May 1847, aged 15, son of George and Maria Pye. He was a cadet in the East India Company. Sadly, he was the only son of this prosperous Bredgar farming family. Corporal Arthur Ingram was brought up in Primrose Lane. He had emigrated to Canada from Bredgar and was a corporal in the 21st Battalion Canadian Infantry when he was killed in action on the 3rd of September 1917, aged 26. This is one of the many Goodhue graves in the churchyard. There were several branches of the family in the parish during the 19th and 20th centuries. Many were farmers, such as Thomas Goodhue, who farmed at Bexon Farm. Other members of the family included a landlord of the Sun Inn and a grocer at Swanton Street. Bachelor Roper farmed Pinchgut, known for the last 100 years as Furze Farm. The Roper family owned land in the parish from the 18th century, but they were wealthier than this suggests, having lands in Tenham and Hollingbourne too. Bachelor died in 1877.
The Travers family lived at Bredgar House. Alice Travers was a great contributor to village life. She formed the local branch of the WI and wrote plays for them to perform, creating the props at her own carpenter's bench.
Her brother James is described as having been killed in an experimental flying accident on the 14th of February 1924. He was 41 years old.
This window and plaque is in memory of Ashley Ruck, a benevolent landowner who died in 1870.
Other stained glass includes a memorial window featuring Christ and St John the Baptist, and an alphabet window which was installed in 1995 to record various aspects of village life at that time.
Now a new century is underway. An extension cemetery is in use on the other side of the village, although of course burials are less common these days. This lich gate was created to commemorate the turn of the millennium. It has a row of ducklings on its ridge. In other respects, of course, Bredgar Church is still here with an active friends group and open for worship at the heart of the community.
For a history of Bredgar itself, you might be interested in Helen's book, which is available from the museum. If you have found this video interesting, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or visit our website.